Joining him on the program was Karoline Leavitt, press secretary for the Trump campaign and now Republican congressional candidate, a move that left eyebrows raised right from the beginning. Before we get to the story, comment where you're viewing from. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. It started with a seemingly typical piece on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, where political guests sometimes appear, usually finding themselves caught in the middle of Colbert's trademark blend of satire and earnest questioning. Karoline Leavitt, an up-and-coming Republican star and one-time Trump White House aide, was brought on to talk about her congressional campaign and her take on the current state of American politics. She probably had a sense she was stepping into a room that was ideologically at odds with her, but few expected things to get so out of hand so fast. As the interview went on, the discussion shifted to the power of political messaging and the contribution of young voters to the 2024 election. That's when Stephen Colbert took a turn that would change the tenor of the entire conversation. In his timeless blend of seriousness infused with humor, he broke in on Levitt in mid-sentence and asked a question which brought the room to a chill. Do you think it's ethical to disseminate misinformation, particularly to voters who may not be equipped to distinguish between fact and fiction? The chuckles in the audience ceased, and an uncomfortable silence pervaded the room. No longer was this a late-night monologue. It was a challenge, one which questioned not only Karoline's policy stands, but her integrity as well. The phrase misinformation filled the air, dense and ominous. It was more than just a careless catch-all. It was an indictment which suggested falsehood, manipulation, and disregard for truth. And at that instant, Colbert wasn't being the nice host. He was making an outright statement, hinting that Levitt's agenda wasn't merely questionable, but perilous. Karoline's gaze narrowed ever so slightly, her smile congealing into something more intent. She hesitated, clearly weighing the significance of what had been uttered. For an instant, it appeared as though the moment would disintegrate into strained silence, but she didn't take a step back. Instead, she leaned in and spoke to Colbert directly, rebuffing the insinuation with a calm, sharp rejoinder. Instead of becoming defensive or agitated, Levitt instead calmly challenged the basis for Colbert's charge. She identified the increasing phenomenon of calling opposing opinions misinformation just because they do not fit prevailing media narrative. Her point was obvious. Opposing the majority doesn't make one dishonest. It just makes them unique. The crowd responded with a combination of applause and skeptical murmurs, echoing the ideological split that was unfolding on stage. Colbert, begrudgingly credit where credit is due, tried to explain himself by pointing to specific talking points attached to Leavitt's political viewpoint, such as issues of election integrity and government overreach, issues often attacked by mainstream media. But as much as he demanded answers, Leavitt stood firm. She told him that her stands were not only because of personal conviction, but were also backed by millions of Americans who feel they are underrepresented in the existing political debate. The encounter was different from the usual light-hearted fare that characterizes late-night television. What was meant to be a rapid-fire promotional visit became a confrontation that shifted the distinction between entertainment and earnest debate. And although Colbert's audience probably split on whether he had any right to push the point, one thing was certain. The instant he charged Karoline Leavitt with disseminating disinformation, he set off a turning point in the dialogue, converting the ordinary interview into a flashpoint for more serious discussions regarding media bias, political polarization, and the influence of public opinion. The room would have cooled a few degrees, but the heat of the moment had already migrated to the internet, where it would set off much wider debates across the political spectrum. Karoline Leavitt waited no time at all before Stephen Colbert's blunt charge of disinformation, whereas most of his other guests might have sidestepped or tripped over the gravity of such a provocative statement on television, particularly on a show renowned for having a no-holds-barred style of humor and political commentary. She opted instead to tackle it head-on. It wasn't the usual response Colbert's guests provide. There was applause, but not from everyone, from a visible segment of the crowd.
It wasn't deafening, but it broke the tension.
There were some in the crowd that were recognizing her boldness in speaking back so forthrightly, and others that sat in stony silence, perhaps unsure of how to digest a guest so ready to speak truth to the host of a program they had enjoyed. Colbert, well attuned to the change, tried to regain control of the segment with a few offhand jokes to restore the tone. But the divided reaction of the audience indicated that the moment had already hit. Audiences weren't merely observing political back and forth, they were seeing a live collision of two worldviews, and they were responding according to their own bias, beliefs, and expectations. Leavitt's power to stay cool in the face of confrontation heightened the moment even more. On programs such as Colbert's, where guests usually play along or get teased in a gentle manner, someone who refuses to budge upsets the normal rhythm, and audiences, unwittingly, were reacting to that disruption. It was less about left or right, and more about who was willing to talk with conviction. For others, that courage was enough to bring respect, even as they disagreed with her politics. Online, the reaction tracked the split scene in the studio. Cuts from the interview were soon shared on social media, and in the comments, there was a clear split. Some accused Colbert of ambushing his guest and using his megaphone to demonize her without allowing her a chance to be heard. Others commended him for standing firm against what they perceived as destructive speech. But even among Colbert's regular audience, there was a wave of amazement at how assertively Levitt navigated the exchange. This wasn't merely a matter of a political leader on a late-night show. It was about pushing the unspoken rules of those venues. Colbert's platform has long been a venue where liberal opinions are celebrated and conservative ones are frequently satirized. By standing her ground and refusing to fold under pressure, Levitt broke that formula. And the audience present in the room, and also the one going online, had to react to something they don't get to see on late-night television all that often. An ideological confrontation not scripted, not edited, and not safe. The divided response to her appearance reflected a larger truth. Audiences are more nuanced than they're sometimes given credit for. While most attended to laugh at Colbert and receive political validation, they also saw a flash of unplanned tension, and some were left applauding the surprise. Guess who didn't retreat? The debate might have been inflammatory, but the divided reaction of the crowd made one thing certain. People are still starved for authentic, unplanned conversation, even when it's uncomfortable. When Karoline Leavitt strode off the stage at The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, the interview had already caused a stir behind the studio doors, but within hours it erupted well beyond them. Footage of her confrontation with Colbert, particularly when she stood up to his charge of disseminating false information, was swirling around on social media in a flash. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube were filled with tweets analyzing the moment, some in admiration of Levitt's composure, others blaming Colbert for his perceived unfair assault. The clip was brief, only a minute or so, but potent. It caught Levitt's firm tone, Colbert's sharp question, and the palpable shift in audience dynamic. What made it go viral wasn't just the confrontation itself, but how unexpected it was. People aren't used to seeing guests challenge Colbert so directly with such composure. That alone gave the moment weight, and it began fueling debates across political circles and media outlets. Suddenly, Levitt's name was trending. Commentators on both sides began weighing in. Conservative politicians and influencers posted the clip, referring to her as a fighter, and presenting her as a fierce voice, willing to enter the hostile land without quitting. On right-wing news channels, she was welcomed as someone who had challenged one of the most potent liberal voices in the media and emerged stronger. For them, the moment was a rallying cry, a moment that captured how conservative voices are frequently marginal in popular entertainment content and how holding ground can speak for larger audiences. Progressive observers also had a different view. Some chastised Levitt as evasive and spinning, while others criticized Colbert for failing to push her harder following her response. Surprisingly, even liberal sources conceded that the exchange did not proceed as Colbert must have hoped. Rather than confront or trap his guest, he had provided an opportunity for her to be portrayed as composed, articulate, and unruffled, characteristics that are marketable in today's era of short-form virality. The fallout from the appearance saw Levitt's public profile rise sharply. Her campaign staff immediately seized the moment, reposting the clip with such captions as, "Not afraid to tell the truth, even on late-night television." It was a strategic victory. She had gone into a situation where the odds were against her, and emerged with video that cemented her reputation as a brazen outsider. In political media, those are moments of gold. Stephen Colbert, while experienced at riding the thin line between political commentary and comedy, perhaps did not anticipate the exchange to take the form it did. His programs are generally designed to facilitate a specific narrative, one which pleases his audience's sense of values and expectation. Levitt's rebuttal, however, derailed that format. Her refusal to play the role of a struggling or outmatched conservative guest forced a change in tone, one that carried over into the online discussion long after the segment had aired. In a lot of ways, the moment was a reminder of how unpredictable live interviews can be, particularly when guests refuse to play by the scripts others might have of them. It also pointed out the double-edged nature of sites such as Colbert's. While they provide a huge audience, they also have the potential to bestow an unexpected spotlight on guests, particularly when those guests meet the challenge. Karoline Leavitt not only weathered the showing, she capitalized on it. Whether one regarded her as a principled conscience or a slick political player, the outcome was the same. Her involvement in the national debate opened up overnight, and a lot of that was due to her being able to stay in command in a moment that was designed to get her on the back foot. In the days after Karoline Leavitt's visit to The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, the moment kept resonating through political analysis, late-night chat show opinion, and public debate online. It wasn't another interview. It turned into a flashpoint that challenged questions about challenging ideas, about talking across ideological divides, and what constitutes a genuine exchange in a media environment that too frequently is one of scripted appearances and anticipated soundbites. What was most striking in the end was less who emerged victorious from the exchange and more that the exchange was occurring at all. Colbert has created a platform that survives on political satire, typically at the expense of conservative. The people who watch him arrive ready to laugh, to have their opinions confirmed, and to indulge in a sense of moral certitude dispensed through sarcasm. But Leight's arrival upended that equation, not by being argumentative, but by calmly questioning the narrative and projecting as someone who is impassioned and in control. She didn't mirror Colbert's tone or strategy. Rather, she brought her own style to the situation that made the moment all the more significant. The wider reaction to the interview indicated just how starved individuals are for unscripted, uncomfortable discussion. People witnessed an unusual instance wherein a guest didn't crumble under pressure or pander to the host. Levitt wasn't there to win over Colbert's supporters. She came to demonstrate that political opposition doesn't necessarily equal dishonesty. And although some disagreed with her opinion, many recognized her standing up to present herself, to be articulate, and not back down in the face of public criticism. For Colbert, the moment might not have progressed as he had intended, but it reminded him why his show is important in the first place. Late-night TV, when executed well, can remain a place where minds conflict, where comfort levels are pushed, and where anything can go. The interview didn't go down as most predicted it would, and that element of surprise made it more compelling than either party might have planned. Karoline Leavitt stepped onto that stage as a fairly lesser-recognized political aspirant looking to cut through a field of competition. She stepped off it as a person who had been able to make a high-pressure moment one that was going to be remembered. Whether or not others agreed with her, they were now discussing, and in politics that level of discussion is all that matters. Underneath, the Colbert-Levitt moment was a snapshot of the current state of American political discourse, charged, polarized, and rife with razor edges. But it was also a reminder that civil conflict remains an option, and sometimes even a success. It demonstrated that ideas can be tried out in public, that disagreement does not necessarily have to turn into yelling, and that standing firm, when conducted with clarity and calm, can alter a narrative in the moment. It was television worth viewing and a discussion worth engaging. His criticisms just get swallowed with a nervous chuckle or sidestepped with vague answers. But Levitt was better prepared. She straightened up, her voice firm but controlled. Directly addressing him, she stated, "Stephen, I appeared on your program aware of what I was getting myself into. But what I refuse to tolerate is the notion that not aligning with your perspective constitutes misinformation." It was a line that cut to the heart of the tension, not with hostility, but with precision. She did not yell. She did not try to play sarcasm with sarcasm, she just issued her boundary. By doing so, she hijacked the moment. Stephen Colbert, for his part, raised an eyebrow, visibly surprised by her refusal to backpedal. This was not a scripted comedy bit or a pre-arranged talking point. Levitt was speaking on behalf of herself, and she was taking on the very essence of the late-night political narrative, that right-wing opinions, particularly those connected to Trump-aligned characters, are actually dishonest or unsafe. Her reaction indicated a larger level of exasperation beyond the interview in and of itself, the perpetual denial of oppositional thought to be automatically invalid. She proceeded by bringing light to what she described as an unhealthy trend within political culture of today. The trend for voices of the media to label ideological opposition distortion of fact. For her, the word misinformation had evolved to be a tool wielded not only to attack lies, but to shut down unwelcome or unpopular. It was more than an attack on her. It was, she believed, an attack on tens of millions of Americans who share her view, who critique prevailing media narrative, and who feel dismissed or addressed condescendingly by mainstream. Colbert tried to call her out again, referencing particular assertions made on the campaign trail that had been discredited by them, but she responded with something at the heart of contemporary political rhetoric. Debunked is highly dependent on who is doing the fact-checking. She pointed out the selective criticism of conservative candidates compared to their liberal opponents, and claimed that political bias masquerades as journalistic objectivity. What set her reply apart wasn't what she said, the way that she said it. There was no hysteria, no overwrought emotion. It was as if she had foreseen this exact moment and had determined beforehand was not going to allow it to define her. She accepted that Colbert had a right to question, that he was performing his role as a commentator, but she made it clear that discussion had to be. "We can disagree without you telling me I'm lying," she said to him. That particular line struck a chord with the audience, with the room erupting into applause. Not the artificial variety, but the natural response of observers who appreciated the forthrightness position. Throughout the rest exchange, Levitt continued to circle back to intellectual honesty. She told us that true democracy effective everyone's voice, including unpopular ones, is in the room. She wasn't asking for acquiescence. She was asking heard without being labeled spoken up. Whether one felt she was right or wrong, her insistence on not giving an inch under duress became the hallmark of the. Instead of letting the moment devalue, she took it and created it on her own terms. When the mood shifted in the moment Colbert accused Karoline Leavitt of propaganda, the tone of the show shifted. What began as political debate with undertones of late-night humor took an instant serious, and the audience reacted. The response in the room was quick but not universal, offering an insight into just how polarized political become, even in venues of entertainment. At first, the audience had been affectionate, chuckling over Colbert's monologue, acknowledging with him his criticism, clapping at well-known lines. But when he addressed Levitt head-on, chastising what he perceived as deceptive talking from her, the mood changed. There was a gasp, a combination of shock and anticipation, as though the audience wasn't entirely sure whether this or not. But Colbert's tone left no room for doubt. When Levitt pushed back calmly, stating that her opinions were not misinformation just because they differed his or from mainstream, something unusual happened.